Attorney and talk radio host Robert Patillo, next on Vince and Jason Save the Nation. Vince and Jason Save the Nation is brought to you by Goldco.
I have a warning for you. Inflation, tax hikes, they're Biden's only way out of our over $30 trillion federal debt. So if you have $50,000 or more in your IRA, 401k, or savings, your money, it's at risk. So learn how you can protect it with physical gold and silver. Just call 855-948-1605 to get your free gold IRA kit. That's right. Just call 855-948-1605. And my friends at Goldco will give you up to $15,000 or more in free silver with a qualified account. You know, Goldco has helped thousands of Americans protect their retirement against inflation and tax hikes. So what are you waiting for? Just call 855-948-1605 now. Hey everybody, welcome back to Vince and Jason Save the Nation. I'm Vince Colonnese alongside my buddy Jason Nichols, Dr. Jason Nichols, and we are chatting about the world's problems. As always, we're going to probably solve them by the end of this episode. Jason Nichols, who's here to help us do that today?
Of course, we have Robert Patillo, one of my favorite talk radio hosts and someone who I've been on air with. I was on air with him on a streaming show last night. Always has interesting opinions and very articulate, and you do not want to debate this guy, so I'm not going to try. We're going to have a good conversation. Robert, how's it going, man?
Hey, it's going great. How are you guys?
Excellent. Robert, so I want to ask you, you're down there in Georgia, right?
Yep.
So I want to ask you about the political temperature right now. Of course, Georgia has been in the news since 2020 and everything that's gone on since then. We saw that former President Trump had a very difficult time with some of those primaries in Georgia. We know he lost a lot of the congressional races. Our buddy Vernon Jones got trounced. Kemp won. Jody Heiss lost to Raffensperger. Is it over for Trump in Georgia?
Not by a long shot, because let's understand, Georgia's been a purple state masquerading as a red state for 20 years. If you look at the state demographically, it's 35% African-American, 20% Latino, 10% Asian, one of the largest LGBTQ populations in the country, 52% women, some of the best universities, young voters coming in. But at the same time, we've been passing a progression of voter suppression laws since 1997, which have made sure to change the political demographics of the state. So for the last decade or so before Warnock and Ossoff won in 2021, you did not see a single Democrat win statewide despite those demographics. You still have not had a constitutional officer elected statewide since 2008, I believe. So when you're talking about the Trump effect in the state of Georgia, it's not so much that he won't be a kingmaker, but there's still a good third of the Republican Party that is still bought and sold in the MAGA movement. Some of the most extreme MAGAs you can think of in the country, people like Herschel Walker, people like Collins, the former congressperson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're still in Georgia, and they will be dictating a lot of Republican policies going forward in the state. They'll still be a force in primaries. Now, their ability to win general elections is still up for question, but I don't think by any means you can consider Trumpism to be dead.
You mentioned voter suppression in Georgia. Do you think that that's the state of affairs in Georgia right now in elections?
Oh, it absolutely is. Let's remember that 1997 was the first voter suppression law, where they literally put in, you can read during the hearings when they were passing that law, that it was meant to reduce the African-American vote. The voter suppression law they passed in 2005 was struck down by the Justice Department as being a poll tax. So yes, Georgia had a poll tax in 2005. If you look at the voter integrity bill that was passed after the 2020 election, the literal purpose of them passing the bill was to take power away from the local jurisdictions that had just cost Trump the election and place that power against the Constitution in the hands of the Republican-controlled legislature. So they don't hide the fact that what they're doing is to try to maintain political power despite the changing demographics of the state.
Well, the United States Constitution, I don't know if you're referring to the Georgia Constitution, but the U.S. Constitution does actually vest power for election laws into the state legislature and the United States Congress. But what's happened in Georgia, the trend among voters is that people have never voted by higher margins. I mean, people are showing up, they're voting. You just went through primaries in Georgia where you had record turnout. And so there aren't votes being suppressed just based on the data.
Well, that's where Republicans get into those that tricky math they like to use. So one, yes, I was talking about the Georgia state constitution, not the U.S. Constitution. But at the same time, it's not a question of the total number of votes, because you have to look at the actual population increase as it's proportional to the number of votes that you are getting increased. So yes, we're getting more people voting, but we're also getting we also are having a population that's increasing at a higher rate than the increase in voting. Remember, Atlanta's population has doubled just in the last 20 years. And when I say they wrested power away from the people and put it in the hands of the legislature, literally the chief constitutional officer overseeing elections in Georgia was the Secretary of State up until this new election bill was passed, which gave the state legislature the ability to override the Secretary of State on elections. It also allows the state legislature to go into, let's say, Fulton County or DeKalb County, majority African-American counties, and then take over the voting process there for very specious reasons at best. So the idea of this not being a voter suppression bill, I think, is antithetical to everything that we've seen statistically throughout the state of Georgia over the course of the last 2 decades.
Yeah, I think that was one of the problems in the marketing of this. People were talking about not being able to have water and line and all of the things that weren't the key crux of the bill, which was the ability to overturn an election, a free and fair election, which I think was the most dangerous part of that Georgia bill. Now, what do you think about Stacey Abrams? Does she really have a shot? Because, you know, according to all the polls, she's far behind, and of course, Warnock is looking like he could actually pull it out. It's pretty sad that, you know, it's even that close, to be honest. But looking at the Stacey Abrams race, she's become a big celebrity. She's somebody who I actually wanted to go and be the vice presidential nominee at one point. And I know that when I went to the debates that were at Tyler Perry Studios in Georgia, the Democratic debates, she got the loudest applause, louder than John Lewis at the time. Like, the crowd, when she stood up, went absolutely bananas. But that's not translating to these polls, which may not take into account the voter suppression that you're referencing. So what do you think's happening there? Does she have a shot? Or is this Kemp State?
No, she doesn't have a shot. And then also, yes, this is Kemp State. Governor Kemp.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, Robert, did you say she does or does not have a shot?
Does not. No, she does not have a shot. Governor Kemp has put the state in a position to have an $8 billion surplus after his first term in office. Standing up to Trump the way that he did gave him points where you can no longer paint him as being, you know, part of this radical MAGA movement. Him and Raffensperger are very much seen as being people who will stand up to the Republican Party establishment and put the people of the state of Georgia before party politics. And as much as people try to paint him as being one of these, you know, crazed MAGA Republicans, he signed into law what many people would consider the quote unquote defund the police law. Which requires for a mental health evaluator to accompany police to address any mental health crises that normally that could result in escalation into police violence. He also was the person who's helped Black farmers throughout the course of his administration, who signed ended the Georgia citizen arrest bill, the law that was used by the killers of Ahmaud Arbery to hunt him down. So he's been a reasonably progressive governor, just wrapped up as a Southern redneck. And I think the Stacey Abrams problem, many people don't like me saying this because the Democratic Party has turned into kind of this cadre of elites who have little dinner parties. They hang out at Tyler Perry Studios. They take pictures with Kamala and LeBron James and those sorts of things. But at the end of the day,
I didn't get a picture with Kamala or as elite as I am.
The Democratic Party has very much turned into a party of small cocktails hours at law firms that do not know how to talk to people. Right now, Donald Trump can come into Georgia and go up to Dalton in the middle of nowhere and pull a crowd of 3,000 to 5,000 people on a Tuesday afternoon. There's nobody in the Democratic Party who has that ability. Agreed. And that speaks to the fact they have no interest in going down to the streets, going down to anywhere you have to be afraid your car might get stolen, and actually campaigning to people. And as long as you're afraid to campaign to the people you want to vote for you, you're going to lose.
Let me cite some data, too, to support the argument you're making, which is out of Axios. They talk about the fundraising that's being done between Brian Kemp right now and Stacey Abrams. From all fundraising, Brian Kemp has made $31.5 million, most of it from Georgia, $26.2 million. Stacey Abrams has raised nearly $50 million, just 7 from Georgia. All of the money, almost all of the money, is from out of state. And that kind of gets to the point that you're making, which is that there are wealthy elites who like Stacey Abrams, who are keying in on her, but she's just not resonating apparently in Georgia.
Well, I think part of the problem is that when your money comes nationally, you have to have national issues. When your money comes locally, you get to have local issues. So I did this thought experiment with a group of legislators I was speaking to last week. If you were running for governor in the state of Georgia, and you saw a group of 18 to 24-year-old African-American males standing at a bus stop in the middle of Southwest Atlanta, one of those neighborhoods that they make documentaries about, you hop out of your campaign vehicle, you walk over to them. What do you talk to them about to get them to register and turn out to vote? Do you talk to them about climate change? Do you talk to them about Roe versus Wade? Do you talk to them about, Medicare expansion? Democrats don't have a message for them. They don't have an interest in having a message for them, and that's why you can't get them.
So if I can interrupt real quick, I think one of the big problems for the Democratic Party, I agree 100%. The only thing that I don't agree, or I at least want to make a little bit of a difference here, or a distinction, is the idea that Republicans are somehow with the working class and that Democrats are these super elites. I think politics is elite. And we're seeing, for example, you got guys like J.D. Vance who get $10 million from Peter Thiel. And then you're going to say, hey, I'm a working class, I'm for the working class. It's like, no, you're getting the same money. Stacey Abrams is probably getting $500 from some physician in Vermont, but that guy's not as elite as Peter Thiel. But at any rate, I do believe one of the things that the messages that I do want to kind of key in on is they don't have a message. There's no message for African-American men. And that's where the Democrats are going to lose in a lot of races. They're going to get very surprised because they are not messaging to African-American men. And those guys in Southwest Atlanta, I think there is a way to tell them about climate change. I think there is a way to tell them about the environment. When you roll through any inner city in this country and you see those big buses and that black smoke go in the air and say, your babies are breathing that. You know what I mean? What are we going to do about that? I think that there is a way when there's that same guy in Southwest Atlanta is going to see his kids, you can actually message to him on issues that affect climate change and all of that. It's all how you do it. But the Democrats have failed at doing that. And they've made it about a lot of these simple identity politics without actually getting some depth to their messaging. And they assume that people are just going to vote for them without actually messaging.
I have a warning for you. Inflation, tax hikes, they're Biden's only way out of our over $30 trillion federal debt. So if you have $50,000 or more in your IRA, 401k, or savings, your money, it's at risk. So learn how you can protect it with physical gold and silver. Just call 855-948-1605 to get your free gold IRA kit. That's right. Just call 855-948-1605. And my friends at Goldco will give you up to $15,000 or more in free silver with a qualified account. Goldco has helped thousands of Americans protect their retirement against inflation and tax hikes. So what are you waiting for? Just call 855-948-1605 now. What do you think, Robert?
Well, yeah, I agree completely with that. But at the same time, I think the other issue is that was one thing to message what you want to talk about to them. It's another thing to ask them what they want to talk about, to ask them what their issues are. That's one of the big benefits of the Trump rallies is call and response. Trump gets a real-time poll. You say something, people clap. You put that in the messaging. Say something, people boo. You don't put that in the messaging. So I think instead of talking to them and trying to convince them that climate change is an issue, which it is, I think you should talk to them about what the hell they want. Like, what is it that you want us to change? Do you want us to create job opportunities? You want us to put in a national program that will have certificate? You can do both, but I think that when you leave off the actual talking to voters about what they want and sticks only to focus groups, well, then what you end up with is running a Seattle campaign in Atlanta, which does not work well.
Let me, I feel like both of you will have thoughts on this. I know both of you have thoughts on this, which is, and I'll start, Robert, of course, with you, what do you think about at the national level, how deep the Democrat bench is, to the extent that it is deep? It's, you've got Joe Biden, New Hampshire survey out this week, just the latest survey, but there's a whole bunch of polls you could look at saying 74% of Democrats don't want him to run again in that state. In fact, among presidential preference, he's number 2. He's behind Pete Buttigieg in New Hampshire, among New Hampshire Democrats. How deep is the bench for the Democratic Party? And if you don't think it's deep enough, what should they be working on right now to actually make it deeper?
Well, I find it interesting when people talk about the idea of a bench, because after George W. Bush left office, for example, there was no Republican bench at all. And then especially nobody would have put Donald Trump on the bench of upcoming Republicans. I think the bench kind of evolves over time. And what's going to happen is some of the older gatekeepers are going to slowly move out of the way, or someone's going to push them out of the way, and that'll open up a whole new bench. I think Democrats
But Robert, they lost after George W. Bush too.
This is true.
So you gotta remember that.
Yeah, I think what happened is that you saw the establishment still trying to hold power for a while, and then once they saw Hillary running, they said, we're not going to win anyway. Let's just let anybody run. And that's how Trump kind of arose. I think something similar might have to happen for Democrats, where you stop running the oldest, whitest guy in the room and just hope he can be a consensus builder. And you actually take into consideration some of these quote unquote radical ideas that are supported by 80 or 90% of the American people. If you look at Biden's poll numbers, Biden could do like 3 things this week and double his poll numbers, basically. Marijuana decriminalization, student loan cancellation, and executive order on climate change. And everybody will say, wow, that was a great idea. Why didn't he do that a long time ago? But for some reason, they're unwilling to do those things. I don't think that they campaigned on. And Democrats have this bad habit of just saying, hey, look, I didn't do anything that I told you I was going to do. You should definitely vote for me, because if I had a bigger majority, I could continue doing not a damn thing for you. And that's definitely like what you voted for.
No, I agree with that. The only thing that I would say is that a lot of things that Democrats want and the American people overall want were in that Build Back Better plan. The problem was Democrats didn't know how to message. And I can tell you, I go into Western Maryland and West Virginia, and Central Pennsylvania sometimes. And in those areas, one of the things that just to your point, and a point that you made earlier, Robert, was, I talked to some people out there, and one of the reasons they love Trump is because he showed up. He went to an area of Maryland that no one goes to, and there's a little small airport. He landed his plane there. He didn't speak. He just got off the plane and waved to a crowd for about 10 minutes, got back on the plane and went somewhere else. But he showed up. You've never seen Joe Biden in that part of Maryland. They think we're going to win Maryland, so why even show up for those people? We're not going to win West Virginia, so why show up for those people? And, they'll go through Pennsylvania. But my point is, Democrats need to start showing up, start showing that they'll fight for every vote. Someone who I don't think is necessarily a great candidate, Beto O'Rourke, he gets really close in Texas. How does he get so close? Not because he's a great candidate, because he goes everywhere and he speaks to everyone. And I think that that's one of the things that Democrats are missing, and they don't bring their message. They just said Build Back Better. But what is Build Back Better? What's in it? Americans actually love universal pre-K. And if you had framed universal pre-K in the sense that not only these European countries are doing it, but you know who else is expanding their pre-K program? China. China's going to be better educated than us because they're expanding their program. So is Russia. So our adversaries are doing this, and they're going to surpass us, just like they're surpassing us in other ways. So there's a way to frame this that I think even Republicans will get along with, but Democrats just don't do a good job at getting out of there and messaging to the entire American people. And then they hired the two worst communicators in the party to be their leadership.
Well, to that point, I find it interesting. Let's just take a very an issue that people are talking about. Let's talk about the border. This is just an example. Sure. The way that Democrats would message the border is they would say, well, we need to have multilateral talks involving the other nations within our sphere of hegemonic power, also about creating a pathway to citizenship while expanding our guest visa program, streamlining the program for amnesty across the southern border, fight the war on drugs and human trafficking in order to create a bilateral agreement that will both secure the border and create the metrics for economic growth going forward. The Republican answer to that would be wall. Build the wall. And so it's very difficult to appeal to voters at a basic level when you're talking like you're teaching a course at Vassar, instead of being able to message it down to a chunk that people can not just remember, but understand and comprehend. So when it comes to Build Back Better, it was a huge omnibus piece of legislation. And in addition to not being able to message it, think about how many folks you know in Trump orbit. You knew the down to like the third chief of staff. You knew the advisors, the presidential counsel, etc., because they were always out and they were omnipresent in media. So whatever Trump tweeted out that morning, by the time you got to the morning shows and Fox and Friends, you had 3 or 4 Trump acolytes on, and they stayed on television and radio carrying the exact same message all day, every day, until you got to the last show that went on at the end of the night, and then they went to the internet to carry that message forward. Who does that on the Biden side? Who are the top surrogates for Joe Biden? If you turn on the Tonight Show or late night shows, those sorts of things, who from the administration can go on and hold a conversation? Who are the consistent faces that are going to always be on the president's side? It seems you see more Democrats criticizing Biden on television than actually supporting him. It is very difficult to build a movement around it when you don't have people who are actually cheerleading the administration.
Yeah, no, and it's funny, we've spent the last 20 minutes I don't know if I'm a Democrat, but to, I guess, Democrats criticizing, Democrats while Vince sits back and smirks. I definitely think that Trump is a media guy. He loved media. He loved cable news. He's somebody who was watching all the time. And these people also wanted to impress Trump. If I go out there and I go on Newsmax or Fox News or News Nation or any of these right-wing networks, or even, the crazy right-wing Daily Caller, no one from the Biden administration is going to call me and say, good job. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's honestly part of it. Not for me, well, personally, but I think that like the Trump people knew when they went on air and they defended Donald Trump, that they were going to get some sort of like, you could have access to the president. You were going to get a pat on the back if you did a good job and you went on CNN. And that's the thing. Pete Buttigieg, reason people want Pete Buttigieg is because Pete Buttigieg goes into right-wing media and never loses because he's a really good communicator and a really good debater.
If I can jump in here, there's a problem, I think, when or just listening to your talk, but I think broadly when I hear criticism around the left, which is like, well, the message is the problem. Like, when Obama went to the White House, a reporter stuck a microphone in his face and was like, basically something about like, hey, what's going to happen in the midterms? It seems like things are going poorly. And he said something to the effect of, we've got a great story to tell. We just have to tell it better. That was basically what he reacted with, and he walked away from the reporter. He made it into like a messaging issue. It's a messaging issue. If we just fix the messaging, people will like us more. And I think, honestly, voters, they can smell out when they're being spun. They can sniff it out when you're talking a lot and you're trying to say, and you're actually doing very little for them. And so, as Robert, when you were laying out kind of like the Democrat messaging around immigration, root causes, multilateral, stop human trafficking, kind of like, it's not just Byzantine. It's not details that people are getting lost in. It's that they know what's actually happening, which is that millions of people are pouring into the country. And nobody likes that. Like, you ask anybody, like, nobody likes that. It's a totally disorderly system. it doesn't matter what your politics are. You might quiet it more based on your politics, but you don't like that situation. And, and there are a lot of people being exploited in that process, the drugs pouring across the border, the human trafficking that's going on. It's just a lot of misery. And there's not a lot of evidence that the Biden administration has the courage to fix it, because they seem to be okay with the status quo. Or at least they're concerned about their leftward incoming so much that they don't want to be seen as, as locking down the border and hammering it. I mean, you talk to people coming across the border, hey, why are you here? Biden, that's what changed. Biden, and they'll say it. It's not, it's not a talking point. It's just a basic thing. I didn't come during Trump. I knew I didn't have as much of a chance. Although many people did come during Trump. Don't let anybody get fooled.
Yeah,
a lot of people came during Trump. But also during Biden, people have an expectation, and rightfully so, because they're going to succeed, that they're going to get into the United States and they're going to be able to stay. So this isn't as simple as, well, it's just the messaging. Republicans can say that they want to secure the border, or in your words, wall, and Democrats talk too much. No, it's that Democrats aren't doing shit to fix it. That's the primary issue. The messaging, yeah, it's good to have a good message, but you got to have a good policy first.
Well, the issue of policy, let's remember, Republicans don't want to fix the border either. They have absolutely no interest in doing so. They like to talk about wanting to fix the border. And guess what? The problem with the border isn't that people want to come here. The problem with the border is that we have a political system where Republicans score points by talking about wanting to close it down, while also wanting the business benefits of having cheap labor in basically every sector. You close that border down, hotels shut down the first day, farms shut down the second day, and the American society grinds to a halt the following day. But what we have to have is, like you said, an orderly system that is not politically expedient to either side. And because of that, we haven't had any sort of immigration reform since Reagan in 1986 with his quote-unquote amnesty bill. Funny thing about the 86 amnesty bill of Reagan, guess who was against that? Coretta Scott King. Since he wrote a letter saying how it would hurt the African-American community to bring in more illegal immigrants. So it's an interesting point of cause that when you don't have a concrete policy that makes sense and you're still having the same Byzantine conversations from the 1980s, you end up with basically the perfect political soccer ball that people can kick back and forth without ever having to do anything. We had compromises on immigration in February 2018. We had another one in 2015. We had another one in 2013 that could have been signed off on that would have fixed the problem, but neither side had the political interest of doing so.
Yeah, I by the way, I agree with you on the incentives of big labor and and why this problem continues to exist. And of course, the influence they wield, not just among Republicans, but among Democrats too, that produces a massive roadblock to fixing what is obviously a problem. And once again, it's the American people being fundamentally ignored. This is just a basic sort of populist issue. Right? I mean, you talk about the demographics in the United States. Why is there a massive realignment going on right now? Meaning not just between Democrats to Republicans. I'm talking about just depolarization among races, especially. It's because people are so dissatisfied with the system. They're pawing everywhere for answers, and they're saying you're not serving me. I'm going to the other guys. And you're seeing it especially in border communities where Latinos are now voting a majority Republicans because they want security. I mean, there's something super interesting going on, and Washington is basically ignoring it.
No, I agree with that 100%. The only thing that I will say, everyone, a lot of my Republican friends keep talking about Mayra Flores, and I just want to be clear that she won in a special election where 7% of eligible voters voted. So we really don't know that was a huge realignment. Now, again, I will agree with you that I think more.
But look at 2020. Just look at the 2020 presidential. Look at 2020 exit polls.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Vince.
I'm just making the point that don't reflexively think as Mayra Flores as some sort of fluke, because we've got a big pile of evidence behind it that says, okay, there's something very important going on.
And I think one of the problems, and again, because we have in the White House one of the worst communicators, and he's lost his fastball even more recently, over the last 5 years or so. But one of the things that he said that was correct, he just said it in an incorrect way, is that Latino communities are very diverse. So I think this idea of this overarching Latino identity and Latino community is a bad way of looking at it. Cuban Americans have always been Republican. Venezuelans have largely for a long time been Republican. Puerto Ricans and Dominicans have largely been Democratic and still are, Mexican Americans. So, but we are seeing those border communities who are frustrated, starting to look for other answers. Now, I will say, I do agree with the administration that you have to, if you want to solve this problem. He mentioned 1986, so we're 4 decades in now to talking about immigration. If we want to solve this problem, you need to look at root causes. Like, that is one of the things. If I have a leak, I can't keep putting a bucket down. If I want to stop the leak, I've got to find the source of the leak. And one of the things that we are seeing when you look at the migration, yes, people say they have a better chance of getting in, but why did they leave in the first place?
But if you keep cutting checks,
economics,
but
climate
Jason,
change.
If you keep cutting checks to your insurance company and your leak continues and they say they're not going to cover it, then that's a big problem. That's what we've been doing in Central America. We've been dumping money into Central America for decades, and we have not actually gotten a resolution because we keep saying, oh, it's the root causes.
But we've been doing, I don't agree that we've been going after root causes the entire time, but I will say this, we've been doing it the wrong way. There are things that we need to deal with. Climate change, political corruption. You don't dump money on politically corrupt people.
I agree.
Because they'll do corrupt things with it.
I agree.
So there are a lot of those things that we need to deal with if we want to keep these people off our borders, or else we'll be talking about this in 2032 and 2036. I think that we'll continue to talk about these things.
And at that point, Robert's still going to be waiting to jump in. I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Robert.
Well, no, because the funny, what I think the biggest issue with immigration is us not reframing the issue. We still talk about it from this very weird 1980s. It's a problem that people want to come here. No, the problem is that we have an organized way for people to come here. The reason America does not have negative population growth is because of immigration. The only reason America still has a service sector is because of immigration. The only reason America still has a manufacturing and a agricultural sector is because of immigration. Look at other nations who don't have the same immigration problems as us. Japan has a graying population that's going to come to a cliff in the next couple of years. There are not enough young people, and the young people aren't having sex. Look at China and their one-child policy. Now they're realizing the problem with that is you have more old people than you have young people, and the young people can't support the old people as that boomer generation gets too old to actually be able to continue in the workforce. We're seeing similar issues in India. So we talk about immigration like it's a bad thing, like it's some kind of virus coming in, instead of seeing it as the lifeblood of America, is because for some reason there are groups in this country that are very afraid of demographic shifts. That's actually, if you go back to the Mexican-American War, the only reason we did not annex the entirety of Mexico was because of the fear of demographic shifts, that you will have a majority Mexican population in America that will lead to social unrest. We still have that exact same policy right now, instead of just saying, look, let's bring more people in the right way because that's the lifeblood of America.
Yeah, I don't really know of anybody who thinks that immigration itself needs to be ended entirely. I think the debate, at least on the right, is about how much legal immigration we should have at any one time. And so for any normal functioning country, you have to have, some limits on immigration. You have to have people assimilate. You can't have the whole planet come at once. That's completely destabilizing. So there has to be, some appropriate rate of flow into the United States of America. The people who are criticizing, I think, on the same basis you are, which is illegal immigration, the disorderly system. And it's not really, we probably shouldn't even call it immigration, although physically that is what happens. It's just simply illegal for foreign nationals to pour into our country without us having a say in how you get here and under what circumstances and whether you should be here at all. We have a say in that as a country together.
Well, look, I agree that we have a say in it, but it should be some kind of logical say, some kind of thing that's like tethered to reality. I have a client right now who's been in deportation proceedings since 2015. The backlog is too large. You can live out an entire life waiting to be deported in this country, but at the same time, you have to live in the shadows. So there has to be a way to come to a point of not talking about this like it's still the 1840s and actually coming to an actual resolution, because most of the people who come here illegally, guess what? They don't want to stay here.
Mhm.
They want to come here and work and go back home. The places that we go on vacation is where they live at. They don't want to go to Minnesota and pick cucumbers. They would like to just go there, work, and return back home. If you have a functioning system, then the problem kind of goes away once you can actually talk about it, and not in these terms of, as the right says, invasion. They're stealing our sovereignty. What they say, the Republican National Convention in 2020, they want to destroy Western civilization as we know it. All these dog whistles to the people to make them think that there's this great population shift they need to be afraid of.
So I think the debate on the right, as I understand it, and Vince, you can kind of fill in here, but I think part of the debate is, what is America getting out of it? So one of the things that we see that's bipartisan is the Farm Worker Modernization Act, which I think Biden could say, look, this is a win. This is going to be bipartisan. We want to bring in farm workers in order, give them visas and give them options because it helps us. It helps our farms. A lot of the rural people actually want it. The other thing is that I think the right, like at least Trump, he was like, look, we want people with skills. You know what I mean? So we want people, tech workers and people that will actually help us build our economy. We don't need, the guy, the young man from Honduras who has no skills and is not a farm worker. So I think that's what the right kind of, at least that's the understanding of the framing that I understand. I think the thing with immigration that we need to understand is, if we really want to solve this problem, it doesn't start at the border. And if you just do that, you need the cooperation. I think one of the things Vince and I have agreed on is that, many people on the right were saying, hey, well, if you want asylum and you have an issue in Honduras, then why aren't you getting asylum in Nicaragua or in Guatemala or in Mexico before you actually get to the United States? You have other options. I think one of the things we do need is stable governments in the Northern Triangle and in Mexico. And for people to be able to, if they have to leave wherever it is they are, we need cooperation from those stable governments where not everybody has to come to the United States. But I think that there are a lot of workers that benefit our economy. This is why, I consider myself to be pro-immigration, is because there are a lot of those people who actually help us and help our economy. And they've already done several experiments where they try to get Americans to do farm work for the wages that farm workers work for. It's not that we're lazy. It's that those wages aren't, something that, American citizens want to work for and do that kind of work for. So they've done experiments in North Carolina where, they tried to get people to do that work for that amount of money. And by the end, they have no one left.
Yeah. So the status quo is that we perpetuate a system where we have an underclass that we're paying poverty wages in order to do that work. It's like, that's awful. So my point is this, simply that should be fixed. Also that, these Central American countries, although the current iteration of this immigration crisis did begin with the Northern Triangle countries, that's not where we are anymore. Now it's people from all over the planet who are coming across our border. And it's the Mexican cartels who are being enriched in this process. Right now, that industry, according to the Department of Homeland Security, is a $13 billion a year industry the cartels are generating. And that's just their human trafficking operations, bringing people into the United States.
So let me ask you this. Do you think that, and actually both of you, Robert as well, and then we probably should, close it down here. But what do you think that Haitians, with all the political upheaval that they are experiencing, that they should get political asylum here in the United States?
Well, if you're starting with me, yeah, because I'm Haitian, Haitian American. And,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so at the same time, nothing has happened in Haiti for the last 250 years without the imprimatur of the United States of America, be it the embargo put on them by Thomas Jefferson, or the invasion of them by Woodrow Wilson, or that time that President Clinton invaded, or that time that President Bush kidnapped the president and dropped him off in Africa, or that time when Joe Biden was president and the president of Haiti mysteriously got assassinated assassinated, and everybody just seemed to not know what was going on, despite all the DEA agents and having to be in Port-au-Prince at the same time. So this idea that America is not significantly, or if not completely responsible for the quote unquote political upheaval, because whenever any kind of leader arose and hated the U.S. was against, they mysteriously either died or went missing or were deposed. So I think, yes, America does owe the Haitian people and many other Central and South American countries for their meddling over the course of the last couple of decades. All these countries want is self-determination, and they're not allowed to have such because what's in America's best interest is not always in the best interest of the countries in their sphere of hegemonic power.
So yeah, I'll table the question. I'm sorry, I won't give you an answer, because my thinking on this is basically, Jason, that we need a basic threshold for like, okay, at what, like how much chaos in anybody's country indicates that they are entitled to asylum in the United States. And I don't know what the answer to that question should be. But obviously once you start down that road, then there's a lot of countries, and especially a lot of countries where the United States has been involved, where that might eventually be justified. But I want to ask a question of Robert, because I wasn't aware of this particular thing. You said that after the assassination of the president of Haiti, there were DEA agents crawling all over the place. Is there a theory that the United States government assassinated him?
Don't get us shadow banned, Vince.
No. When he was like, man, Biden's president, the Haitian president was killed. DEA agents were everywhere. I'm just asking questions.
I thought it was They were Central American guys that went in there.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing where you had a combination of Haitian gangs led by the G7 and their leader Jimmy Barbecue Devalier, who was working alongside a Florida businessman.
His name was Duvalier?
I think it was Duvalier. I have to look it up. It's Jimmy Barbecue. Quote me on the Jimmy Barbecue part. There were also Colombian mercenaries who had gotten through, despite the fact that those waters are patrolled by the U.S., who carry out the assassination. Also, the fact that, all the security guards are alive and the president's dead is always really iffy. For things, that's usually not a good sign, where there's no gunshots except for the ones that went into the president. So there's all kinds of theories out there, but generally speaking, when something happens within the sphere of hegemonic control of the United States of America, 90 miles from one of your states, you have a serious international incident, you hear more about it than we heard about it in U.S. news. It kind of bubbled up for 2 days and then evaporated completely. So when we talk about political unrest within the region, the U.S.'s fingerprints for the last 75 to 100 years have always been on it. I think many people believe that currently.
But don't you think like part of this with Haitians is because, and I, forgive me if this sounds insensitive, but I think when we think of Haiti, we think it's one thing after another. Like Haiti is always experiencing some sort of upheaval, tragedy, natural disaster. That's what desensitized the American media to Moise's assassination.
Well, it's a concept called Haiti fatigue, but it's completely engineered by Western press. If all you did were think about Chicago, for example. You know how the calling card on the right, whenever something happens, is, well, what about Chicago? Because it's almost as if you want to make it seem like the entire city is this Mad Max style war zone. Well, you go there, you go to the lake, you go to Magnificent Mile, you take pictures by the Jelly Bean, you eat Italian beef, you go to a Cubs or White Sox game, things are fine. Similar to Haiti, if the only thing that you're ever going to report on are all the terrible things that happen, you put this image out there that only terrible things happen, which negates tourism, negates foreign investment, negates expatriation. So it turns into a snowball effect around that.
Yeah. You got me thinking. That's for sure. Because I was instantly, as soon as you brought up Haiti and the coverage, and Jason, what you were talking about, I was like, oh yeah, Chicago too. I think that's a place, and Robert said it, Chicago. Man, I want to see things turn around.
I think, Chicago is one of those places where is, all of these cities that the right likes to mention, a lot of times they're actually some of the safer cities. They can make like good arguments about other cities, but let's
Chicago, not get crazy. There are definitely dangerous areas of Chicago.
Sure. What city aren't there dangerous areas in?
No, I know, but Chicago is one of, there are areas of Chicago that are more dangerous than a lot of third world countries. So So and that's not just like the right saying it. That's like Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, saying it. There's
definitely gun violence in Chicago. But I would say there are parts of the country, that are, again, and a lot of times they make this a partisan thing. And I don't want to go through all the talking points of like the Republican cities that are just smaller, but have, higher rates of violence and murder than you would find in Chicago. Those areas are desperate. And that's an argument that I think the populist right, if you really are a populist, you will talk about the poverty there, and the situation, the economic situation. And those are not I'm talking about just in general. Right. But the populist right, if they're really concerned about those areas, don't throw them and kind of dehumanize it. Talk about the poverty, talk about the desperation, talk about the education there, and come up with solutions rather than using it as a talking point.
But poverty, and Robert, you may know on this, but I think we talked to Zed Jelani a while ago. There are people out there that have looked at this. Poverty does not have a direct correlation with violence. There is disconnected. You can find very impoverished areas in America that are not violent at all, very safe communities. And then you can find very impoverished areas that are very violent communities. And so poverty, you're right, that is, as both of those issues in isolation need to be confronted aggressively.
And just kind of to that point, kind of tying together Chicago and the conversation on immigration, the big thing that ties both of those together is the U.S. policy on drugs. That is Mexican drug cartels. They're delivering the one good that you can sell in America for 80 to 1,000 times their production costs that Americans like to put up their noses and into their veins. And at the same time, the violence in Chicago and many other urban areas is turf wars for gangs in order to sell those same narcotics. Just as we saw the mob and Al Capone back in the 20s, you end the prohibition, you end the economic incentives. If you can just go to Walgreens and buy the drugs you want, well, you've now cut the Northern Triangle out of the entire equation. If you no longer have to, vice lords and bloods are no longer fighting over who gets to sell a certain product in a certain area, well, now you've taken away the economic incentive of that, and you can use that money towards community development, because you have housing issues in many of these cities. You have transportation issues. You have access to food issues, access to education. And so all those things kind of trace their way back to this draconian war on drugs we've been losing for the last 75 or 80 years. But for some reason, we don't want to address that, because that actually solves many of the underlying issues we have in America all at once. You have one failed policy that causes so many other failed policies, but you keep that one going.
Thomas Sowell had a phrase, and we've talked about it before, that there are no solutions, no policy solutions, only trade-offs. So when you make a decision like that, what are the costs of something like that? And I can't help but think that I'm confident of it, that America would become sadder and more despondent in a world where drugs were legal and rampant. Because let me just give you one example. One example, and I'll let you respond. I'll do it quick. Which is, look at what happened at the opioid crisis in the first place. That was legally distributed Purdue Pharma OxyContin that was rocketing around the United States, and that induced the beginning of a horrific opioid crisis in the United States. Now that obviously it's complex, it's changed a lot since then, but that was the starting point for that. I worry that in a world where we legalize highly addictive drugs, we're going to crush the lives of Americans, and that's a dire trade-off in the environment you're talking about.
Caffeine is a highly addictive drug. Alcohol is a highly addictive drug. Sugar is a highly addictive drug. At the end of the day, I don't know if the role of the federal government is to make those moral decisions for the individual. Right now, all of us right now.
Wow. He's sounding like the right-wing person.
Well, look at it.
Sounding like the libertarian, the right-wing libertarian.
Well, look, I'm in Atlanta, wherever you guys are at. None of us are more than 10 minutes away from being able to buy crack if we wanted to. And that's just the God's honest truth. If any of us really felt like it, we could probably find somebody and buy some crack or some heroin right now if we really felt like it. Whether it's legalized or not. So what are we really regulating? We're regulating the ability to regulate these items. And so this is how you end up with fentanyl spikes going around the country. This is how you end up with bad batches of heroin taking out entire communities, those sorts of things. Because we live in this weird Victorian society where we still think the government government, oh my God, these poor ruffians do not know how to regulate what goes into their body. They must eat cereal and not masturbate. So we don't live in that society anymore.
So I would key in on one thing you said, and then I think we should wrap up. But one thing that I will key in on is something that I think the difference between the right-wing approach and what I think of as the left-wing approach to immigration is, actually getting cooperation from the Mexican government to actually crack down and giving, providing some resources, law enforcement resources to crack down on the cartels, rather than just thinking about smugglers at the border. Because again, it doesn't start at the border. Like, it starts with the cartels and the drug cartels and the drug organizations, not just the drug mules. That's the same approach that we had with the war on drugs, was we let the kingpins and the smugglers, go, but we got the corner boy, you know what I mean? And we put him in jail for 3 or 4 years. And that's not a good approach. You don't get the little guy and let the big guy go. You have to take care of these organizations and start to dismantle them. And part of that is compelling, with carrots and sticks, some of these governments and rooting out corruption and getting them to actually hold these cartels accountable. Because, if you're just going to fight it at the border, like you said, wall, that's not going to stop it. So it's funny. I used to go, I still go on this one TV network, and they would always have this like scary music. And then they would put up a picture, where they'd be talking about, it would say invasion. And they had these people climbing over the wall. And every time, I never said it, but I always wanted to be like, so isn't that graphic showing that the wall is ineffective? If you've got all these people, you're showing pictures of these people on top of it, climbing over it, like there's got to be another way. So I think that there's, I think, we talk about why people didn't come during Trump. It was because some of the cruelty, separating families. People were like, oh crap, I don't want to, I don't want to be separated from my children. We separated almost 4,000 families, and 270 of them we still can't find their parents.
But Jason, what you're talking about, that's what happened with the Trump administration with Mexico. So Trump threatened a trade war with Mexico, and Mexico said, uncle, not going to do that. So what they did was they started enforcing their own southern border. They started putting federal law enforcement on their southern border to keep people from flowing north through Mexico. And they agreed to the Remain in Mexico arrangement in order to try and bring down the amount of illegal immigration in the United States, because they don't want people getting so the end result was it did have a stifling effect on illegal migration into the United States. That's exactly what you're talking about, which is getting Mexico to address some of these.
We still got Remain in Mexico. We still got that. We've still got Title 42. We've still got people but living in inhumane conditions. That's the other thing is whether these migrants deserve humane conditions or inhumane conditions. So I think that's part of this discussion. Robert, what do you think? And then we gotta wrap up because I gotta go to work. The job that actually pays me, Neil Patel. No, I'm kidding.
Well, it's interesting because Trump gave a speech, I think it was yesterday, the Talking Points meeting in DC, where he talked about what his plan was to tackle homelessness. And he said, I want to purchase a bunch of land for cheap out on the outskirts of cities. And then I want to ship all the homeless people out there and build tent cities for them. That was literally his exact same plan on immigration, because all he did was just set up a tent city on the other side of the border. And the minute that there was a breach in the armor, everybody just came back. You're just pinning up the demand instead of addressing the actual demand. And when we talk about getting the Mexican and Central American governments to attack the cartels, that's like telling the American government to attack the big pharma cartel or to attack the OPEC or the oil cartel. Those are their funders. Those are the people that keep them in office. Often they are members of those organizations, and that's how they got into power in the first place. So I think instead of trying to tell other governments what to do, just change the American policy on drugs that is financing all of this. Take away the economic incentive, make it where people have to go get a prescription and get therapy, tax the hell out of it, and then allow individuals to make their own choice. If you decide you want to use drugs, Go do it. That's your life. I'm not here to live it for you. If you decide you don't want to, then by all means, continue doing that. It'll be the exact same system we have now, just better and safer, and it solves the problems.
I do think we need to root out corruption, because I think some of this is just human trafficking. It's not just about drug trafficking. So I do think we need to root out corruption in those countries, and also attack, which the cartels aren't just involved in drug trafficking, they're involved in human trafficking. So we need to also do that. But I will say this, in terms of legalizing drugs, I'm open to that conversation. I'm down for that, actually. But I will say this, Robert Patillo, I don't know why I said Patel.
That's my
I was
Indian
thinking of another Patel that I know. Robert Patillo, I just want to say thank you. This was a riveting conversation. I enjoyed this so much. And Vince, I haven't seen you in a long time, so at least it feels that way. So it's always good to actually have a conversation with my good friend. So the three of us need to get, a beer or a tea or something. No sugar, because that's an addictive drug. No caffeine. But we definitely need to get together and have these conversations in person. I love having this discussion. So next time you're in DC, Robert, look us up and we'll all get together. Thank you for watching Vince and Jason Save the Nation. Like, subscribe, and share with your friends. All right. Peace out.